Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Black Hat Middle East and Africa webinar series. I'm Tim Brown. I'm going to be moderating this session. I am the CISO for SolarWinds. For those who don't know SolarWinds, we're an IT service provider. We became pretty famous a couple years ago for a supply chain attack. Today, we're going to talk about what impact does cybersecurity have on logistics and supply chain. So just a little bit about supply chain. So, during our initial attack, you know, we were attacked by the Russian SVR. We ended up shipping tainted code for, a number of products. And, in the first days of that, I coined the attack against us a supply chain attack. And why I called it a supply chain attack is because they didn't attack our source code control system. They attacked our build process and that build supply chain that ended up inserting code somewhere that was, unexpected, that was harder to find, much more difficult to discover. So they essentially inserted that code into the supply chain for us, and then we went through, signed, and shipped it. So that was day one when we called it a supply chain attack. Now, secondary to that, the supply chain really became much more prevalent for our customers and much more front and center for all of our customers. Because when you look at the larger supply chain, where do we fit? We fit into many different systems. We fit inside of people monitoring the network for power systems. We sit into the network for people monitoring for retail and monitoring for you name it. We were part of that type of supply chain. So that spurred a lot of conversation around supply chain in general. How much we understand about the supply chain, what are dependencies on supply chain, what are dependencies from an individual product, or what are dependencies in a broader sense of the world. So, that spurred a lot of conversation. So today I'm looking forward to a conversation about, supply chain and logistics. So today we have Colonel General Jared Acosta, Colonel Jared Acosta, and Renata Spinks with us here. So welcome, Renata, welcome, Colonel. Could you please introduce yourself?
I'll defer to Renata first, ma'am.
Oh, aren't you so kind? Good morning, everyone. I'm Renata Spinks. I'm the Assistant Director for IT, for Command and Control Communications with SC4 with the Marine Corps. I'm also the Marine Corps CISO. So two hats. One is very tactical, a lot of weapon systems involved, a lot of our tactical communications, satellites, radios, you name it. That has been so much fun for me. As well as certifying systems. And you probably heard a lot about our Department of Navy approach for continuous monitoring and continuous readiness. So cyber readiness is something that I'm really focused on, and just happy to be here and share the stage with SolarWinds and Colonel Acosta. So over to you for your introduction. Thanks.
No, thank you. Thank you, sir and ma'am. Black Hat, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. So obviously I represent the Defense Logistics Agency. I'm Colonel Jerry Costa. I'm a commander for one of our regional commands. We focus on the Middle East and all special operations. What we do is we provide really the wholesale solutions for anything that's going on within our services from a global footprint perspective. So obviously, cybersecurity and how we protect our logistics infrastructure is keenly important for any of the operations that we have for globally. So really looking forward to the discussion today. Thank you.
Thank both of you for joining. So, when I look at, my little tiny piece of supply chain, it's nothing compared to your supply chain. So give me a sense of how cyber kind of fits into it. How does it affect it? What are some of the challenges that you both face? Renata?
So when you think about supply chain for the Marine Corps and Department of Defense at large, I'll try not to talk too much and take Colonel Acosta's area of focus as well, because everything is logistics. Because without logistics, we have a major problem. But after logistics does their things and their, Herculean efforts, when our devices show up for command and control, that means radios, that means satellite communications, that means all the way down to the end user from a computer perspective, or our cell phones. You've been hearing a lot about BYOAD. All that has a lot to do with circuits, a lot to do with switches and routers, electronic signals, you name it. Our supply chain is very, very, very critical. That is, I like to say, with cyber is alongside our supply chain because it's so foundational to enabling our ability to support the Marines across the globe, whether they're partnering with the DLA and some of the things that they do for us, as well as partnering with people like Southern Command and Special Forces, the Navy aboard ships. It's nowhere where supply chain doesn't really matter for us. And I'll talk to you about a little bit about just the concept of command and control. You asked, how does it affect your ability for us to do our mission? Well, command and control is it. We have to give commands, we have to give controls. We use computers and communication methods to do so. So a great scenario that I like to communicate with a lot of my constituents when we're talking to them is the ability to give direction, the ability to have situational awareness, and the ability to make those decisions at the time of need is something that the commandant refers to as readiness. You hear that a whole lot. And so our force design is really focused on the readiness of our troops and the ability to have those persons where they need to be at the time of need with what it is they have to have. And without our supply chain and those materials that are so critical, whether that's assembly lines, whether that's coming right off of the production places, or just coming off with a commercial off-the-shelf product that we use in the government, because there's so many adjustments that we have to make from an encryption and safety perspective. I'll stop right there because there's so much more we could talk about. A lot of the greatness that goes on at DLA helps our Marines and sailors. So I want to hand it over to Colonel Acosta to kind of let him opine a little bit.
So I'll start off with the premise. Those are great comments. So I'll start off with the premise that there's an old axiom that amateurs talk strategy and professionals talk logistics. I will tell you that the modern leader has to talk zero and ones. The modern leader is encumbered with data literacy, data analytics, and data visualization. I'm going to go one step up and talk about the Department of Defense and how cyber and just the domain, the electronic domain, has really changed our global posture and our global strategy. It used to be up to, I was even 10 years ago, DoD's global strategy was holistically rooted on the belief that we had technical overmatch against any peer competitor. Today, the term that you will hear is contested environment, contested logistics, and now we're at near peer, and that changes everything. It changes global posture. It changes how we do contracts and acquisition. It changes how we do distribution, and obviously the foundation of that is logistics. Everything from research and development to global acquisition and contracts to how we partner with our commercial partners to meet the tactical need in order to get that in order to gain that competitive advantage in a tactical scenario.
Yeah, the complexity of both of the environments is just so large, right? So big, so many different things. How do you handle the complexity? Does that complexity get pushed down to individuals that are responsible, or just the complexity of the logistics around the world must be intense?
So I'll kick it off with that one. Yeah, I'll kick it off. So obviously the complexity is huge because when you look at wholesale, wherever we operate from a global perspective, we are dependent. We're completely dependent on the infrastructure globally. So, and what I mean that by that is energy access. So energy facilities. We're looking at global distribution. So everything from contracting logistics, trucks to boats to mass warehousing, where we store all of our food and water and material forward. And then all of that obviously has some customer relationship management tool component to it, some in-transit visibility component to it, bills and materials component to it, and everything is contested in the event that any change or interdiction to any 0 or 1 in any analog can create devastating effects. I mean, we saw that with, I mean, although it was not a cyber attack, but you saw how a stoppage of the Suez Canal
Right.
recently, how it just shifted global economics.
Yeah.
And so, and then the key, most important piece is, how do we communicate? How do we communicate from at least from a Department of Defense perspective in a secure environment? How do we communicate with the local vendor that's in some country trying to operate with us? And that, that interdiction of communication is what's got to be protected.
Excellent.
Minetta?
I I think it's a shared responsibility. As we elevated all the way up to the Department of Defense during this
Yep.
conversation, I think it's a team of teams approach. You hear the Honorable DOD CIO, Mr. Sherman, talk a lot about the team of teams approach, and we can't do it without each other. From lessons learned across the services and within the fourth estate, as well as some of the special teams and special operations that they are actually trying to achieve, maybe things that we don't see day to day, but still there are opportunities to learn from all of the different things that happen, what we call in the fleet or in the field. Additionally, when you think about how the landscape has changed and how the supply chain is so important foundationally, it has always been. However, so has the adversary. You spoke about it earlier with the solar winds, but not just solar winds. We had Log4j, we had F5, lots of firewalls, and firewalls is what we use to kind of protect that pass through and communications. And so you stop communications, I think the world stops. It's almost like what happened with COVID-19 and such a major health scare. And in order to protect the people and protect their health, there was a stop movement kind of sort of, so that we can get our arms around it. Well, on the battlefield, you really can't just say, okay, stop everything, enemy. Let's gather ourselves so that we can try and respond to what it is you're actually doing. So a lot of leadership that's very anticipatory. So how do you get your arms around that? I like to tell people, not being the smartest one in the room, making sure that you can get all of the expertise from industry and partners, making sure you build your workforce as much as possible. And then try your best to prepare for a bad day, keeping the morale up, keeping everyone with as much intestinal fortitude and intellectual curiosity that you can think of to try and get ahead of the adversary. You heard Colonel Acosta talk about, contested and near peer. That is so on point. It is. I know some people get caught up into buzzwords and say, oh, everyone says that. But the reason we're saying that so much is because that is a true picture of the adversarial challenges that we're having within the cybersecurity domain. And I want to take a minute to talk about the electronic piece, because most times when we hear cybersecurity, most of us, we revert to business operations. Most of us, we revert to our end user devices and incident response. And that's great. That's wonderful. And it has its place. But within the mission set that we have within the Department of Defense and the world, because I think everyone is a cybersecurity warrior, but the challenge that we have is protecting the constituents of America, our American taxpayers, protecting them no matter where that global fight is. And also, no matter what the role is. We have lots of different roles and responsibilities and different challenges that we are coming up against right now, not just some of the cybersecurity breaches that I just spoke about, but simple things as payroll. Simple things as movement of troops, if we want to talk about logistics again. If we want to talk about the acquisition community and a lot of the challenges and changes that are happening there. You just heard maybe, I think that was about April, where the Secretary of Defense came out with acquisition guidelines and how do we actually increase our ability to rapidly acquire. Well, with rapid acquisition also comes rapid requirements, rapid test and evaluation. And so things like scaled agile is so important to become masters of. And so all of that is about logistics, and making sure that we can have that movement. So I think within the electronics, you think about, you heard Colonel Acosta talk about data analytics. Metrics are so important. Being able to have metrics and have the information at the ready. If we don't have information at the ready, yesterday's information is yesterday's newspaper, right? And so having systems that can glean that data, secure the data at the same time we're trying to glean it, and interpreting the data. So there's so much around it, that lies in how we acquire and then how we deploy and utilize this data. And I wouldn't be a Marine civilian senior executive if I didn't talk about that degraded environment. So when not if, but when the enemy cuts us off, because it's going to happen. Or we may make a choice within a mission set to cut ourselves out and to use the degraded or low frequency when we start to talk about electronic warfare. When we choose to do those things or go dark, how do we operate within those spaces?
Yeah.
Our supply chain is so critical then. Because what I don't want is something beaconing out when it should not be, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And supply chain is just when we look at our dependencies, right, and the dependencies of those dependencies and those dependency of those dependencies, the data problem, as you talked about, is huge, right? Do we know what the next log4j looks like, right? And we know they're going to come up. We know we're going to have dependencies, but understanding what effect they actually have on the environment and being prepared to be able to kind of grow from the small, minute single application component of a supply chain. Well, what does it mean in the rest of the supply chain? Do you think we're prepared to understand all the components in the supply chain today and be able to understand what, one thing like a log4j coming out is, how it would affect the rest of it?
So I would tell you that the onus is what I've seen is three things really. There's a big tackle of understanding tier supply chain providers in the multiple chain. It all starts in the acquisition process. It starts in getting these certifications from the major prime contractor who's providing a service through the cybersecurity maturity model certification. But now the big push is understanding the vulnerabilities of the second and third tier supplier. What we do see, where I think the biggest threat, it's not the big companies and their infrastructure. It's the one little small, mom and pop shop that's creating that one little gadget that we need. That is an important component of an assembly. And how do we protect the manufacturing and the distribution of that one piece? And how do we then create a certification process where they might not have, the infrastructure or the the finances to support that, but how do we protect them? How do we develop that? That is something at the user tactical supply chain that we're focusing on. What I do like though is certain programs that DoD has put into place, like the recent DoD's Bridges program, which is allowing small companies to be able to compete in classified research capabilities. That opens up the aperture to bring more knowledge. And then from a DoD structure, organizational structure piece, going back to what Ms. Renetta was talking about, is one, what you're saying is combatant commands and tactical units are starting to include cybersecurity planning in their operations plans. Not something that was being done even as of 5 years ago. But now it's a component that's being evaluated and audited to make sure that we're ready to operate anywhere in the world. Now it's really that business environment tactical piece, that connective tissue that we need to start developing on because of our reliance on commercial partners.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Great answer. Interesting space. Yes, from a software vendor perspective, right? Where we're looking at, legislation to require SBOMs, right? So software bill of materials. one of the questions that we have is, can people consume it, right? Can they take all of this in? An SBOM for Microsoft Windows is going to be 10,000 lines long or whatever it's going to be, maybe more, and all of the components underneath it. So, if we look at the kind of the ideal world, and we all software vendors start providing that information to you, to you folks, will you be able to consume it and get meaning out of it, right? What are your thoughts, Renata? I mean, is that, if we get to that, does it help?
I tell you, I'd say go down to Texas to Army Futures Command and ask that question. I think they're doing a phenomenal job when it comes down to providing platforms within the Department of Defense to consume large scale code. I don't think the challenge will be the consumption, because there are things like Platform One. There are many different software platforms that I think the government are in glide scope to be able to adopt. I think it's more of adjusting to a culture that's used to more of a waterfall approach, where now you got to be faster. Within Marine Corps, we have to be lethal and faster, right? And so we can easily adjust. Being an Army girl, as an Army veteran, and within the medical domain, it was easy to adjust when we had to what we would say, coming in hot. It was easy for us to go faster. It was easy for us to bring all hands on deck, because you were in a confined space. It was people based. If you needed more nurses and doctors, or whatever you needed at that time, you could plus up troops. Well, in the software side, we don't have a lot of practice in that area of when we need to go faster. Scaled Agile framework gives us a framework, but within the government, not a whole lot of practice. We've been doing waterfall approaches for so long because we were building these big things that required those type of requirements, and a less sophisticated adversary that was not such an aggressive attack vector, as well as a sophisticated one, right? So I think the consumption will be the easy part. I always say technology. When you think about those things, technology and engineering, we have some smart people, Herculean efforts when it comes to that. But I think conceptually, not just the adoption, but the readiness to consume, right? And making sure that when we are needing to roll out those different capabilities in the quickest manner, how do we add value? How do we produce immediate outcomes in a secure manner? We talked about earlier the CMMC and the different certification processes, and the different challenges for small businesses that does present. And so I was very heartened when I saw the Bridges program, and it let me know people are really thinking about the people we depend on, because sometimes it's that small niche that's critical to that particular capability. And so having that thought process is wonderful and is great, but it's also an avenue of attack, right? And so as Colonel Acosta said, what are we doing to protect those small businesses as they're working with the large businesses? And so that's going to be a partnership that I'm going to be excited to continue to watch evolve. But that's what I think it is. I think it's the platform and the ability to actually execute within an agile framework.
Yeah, the agile part is hard, right? If you look at common criteria now from a vendor perspective, I mean, I've got a year to do common criteria, then I've got a year beyond that for, Doden. So you're running 2-year-old software. Do you know how much has changed in 2 years? And so that side is also kind of something, if we want to be agile, we've got to try to figure out how to let you guys procure the right and keep up with software.
Yeah. And I think the Marine Corps is on the cusp of figuring that out. We do this thing called continuous modernization. You've heard us talk about task force network modernization. And what that does is it introduces a discipline, because it's outcomes based, it's results only. It's not what can you do for me today. Actually, the Commandant and General Glavy, the DCI, is saying, what did you do for me this morning, 10 minutes ago, 5 minutes ago? And so network modernization has introduced a discipline, because when you make changes to the network, gone are the days where you can make changes within your configuration database and management control and it not affect multiple other areas of your network. And so network modernization is so critical, conceptually modernizing, but also divesting. There's things like what you said, 2-year-old software. Why is it still in the network? Because I guarantee you're not using it, because most of us are migrating to cloud. And so, or we're in a hybrid environment. So network modernization is really critical. It's a drumbeat that you're going to hear me continuously talk about, because it affects our readiness, right? And if we don't continue to modernize your network, the enablers that are needed to utilize those things that are coming off the supply chain and logistics and aviation, all of that will start to fail, and will revert back to outdated software, and outdated software means avenues of attack.
Yep, absolutely. Colonel Costa, comments?
No, no, absolutely. So I'm going to sound a little critical, because to your point and to Renetta's point, there's an actual, there's a satiable appetite for data and new technology. But what we have seen is I think we have a great network of hubs, the what we call the SoftWorks, the AFWorks, the Army Futures Command, and every service has its own, its own criteria, its own avenue to acquire this technology and review the technology. But what I've seen that we need a little bit more work on is and just to sound critical because I want us to get better, right? Is the DoD Joint Authorization Board. So once you find that true technology, in order to put it in practice from a contractual perspective inside the cloud, the level of scrutiny and time consumption required to get that technology inside the DoD Authorization Board, I have seen it. It's a very hard process. A lot of good companies, when I sit in these what I call the family of works, very hard. If you were to do a study of how many of these companies, receive some type of laudatory comment and actual fruition into being able to penetrate into the cloud to do some of its work, that's hard. It's difficult, and I think hinders our ability a little bit to really, achieve that technical match with some of our adversaries. I like to get Renata because that's it's a little bit outside my field, but at least from my experience, it's something that we definitely got to improve on.
No, you're spot on. I think what you're highlighting is something that's culturally ingrained in us as leaders. We're a little bit risk averse to incrementally rolling out capabilities. But if we don't adopt the incremental approach, then what you just highlighted is going to continue to be the bane of our very existence. It's going to be very difficult, because you can no longer have 16 to 20 lines of code that gets you exactly what you need at the moment, but wait to release it
2 years.
because right. Most when you really think about it, when we understand the capabilities, and I'm not trying to be critical, but that may have come out critical. When we truly understand the capabilities that we are deploying, that is how we can assess risk and understand that as a CISO, I'm a pusher. I am a risk taker. I'm going to tell you that right now. But I make calculated risks and I make informed risks.
Yeah.
Now that takes a lot of rigor. It takes a lot of time as senior leaders as an authorization to do so. But I will tell you, where we have to go is understanding the partnership that we have in our leadership, the partnership that we have within vendors. We have zero trust. So now you have conditional access. It's almost like I'll let you get so far and then I'm cutting you off if something is strange. All those are enablers to what Colonel Acosta is talking about. It gives you the ability to accept risk. I didn't say accept breach. I said accept risk. I mean, I get in my car every day. I drive down the road every day, and I have a sign that says you're going to get pulled over if you don't have a seatbelt. Now, I don't stay home and say, well, I don't want to drive because something may hit me. I put my seatbelt on. I pray to God to get me from point A to Z, and life is great. And so while technology is not the same, and the risk to our soldiers and our troops on the battlefield every day is not the same as getting in your car and driving down the road, the risk acceptance countenance is the same. We got to learn how to accept risk somewhere, and so it has to be informed by risk analysis and calculating that risk. And in order to calculate the risk, you got to understand what the features are. And
Yeah,
so a lot of work.
you have to have the information necessary
Yep.
to make an informed decision.
Yep.
You know, one
Yep.
of the changes that we made and that we think a lot of the software companies are following is, instead of simple answers to, broad questions, how do you develop software? It's not just a one-word answer anymore, right? It's a full page of, this is how we develop software. How do we do this? We're looking at internal audit for our development process so that we have documentation to provide you on, this is how we develop. So I think you will see more maturity from different software providers and different providers that can then help evaluate risk, right? And I think that's going to help us kind of drive that risk conversation so that we then have more to understand, because you're absolutely correct, we never have a full zero risk environment, right? So, but we do need to have enough information to validate it or to measure it appropriately.
Yeah.
I think we are on time. So, thank you both for your comments, and it was a very interesting conversation. I learned a lot, so really appreciate it. And thank you everybody for listening, and hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.